I never thought a simple road trip would completely change my life. Years earlier, Jack's passion for construction began during his high school years, working alongside his father in the family-owned business. Every summer, he learned the value of hard labor, developing skills that would later shape his career. His bond with his parents was strengthened through shared projects, often marked by late-night planning sessions over blueprints spread across their kitchen table. Lily, on the other hand, grew up in a bustling suburban neighborhood, where her love for adventure was fueled by childhood trips to national parks with her family. Her close-knit friendship with Sophie and Mia began during these outings, solidifying a trio of confidants who would eventually share countless escapades. Tragedy struck Jack's family when a car accident claimed his parents' lives, leaving him grappling with grief and the overwhelming responsibility of wrapping up the family business. The sale of their assets provided little financial relief, leaving Jack with just a plot of land and a shed that became a refuge in his times of despair. Lily, meanwhile, thrived in college, embracing the independence it offered. Her adventurous spirit blossomed further as she and her friends meticulously planned their dream summer road trip, piecing together an itinerary that promised excitement and freedom. Their lives crossed paths during Jack's first semester at community college, where their connection was instant but marked by differences. Jack's practicality contrasted with Polly's spontaneous nature, yet they found common ground in their shared determination to pursue personal goals. Despite their contrasting personalities, their relationship deepened, with Jack appreciating Polly's zest for life, while she admired his steady, reliable character. Yet as their engagement progressed, their differences sometimes led to misunderstandings foreshadowing challenges ahead. Jack was taken aback as Polly, his fiancée, finished her thought. A surge of anger bubbled inside him while driving to the show for the usual date. He had casually suggested it a week-long camping trip, after her college classes wrapped up next month. Lily, he said, his tone tinged with disbelief. You know, I'm heading out the day after your semester ends, Mia. Sophie and I practically packed for our summer trip out west. This has been in the works for ages. Jack's frustration boiled over. Lily, I can't believe you're still planning on going. When we got engaged, I thought we had an understanding. You wouldn't go. What changed, Polly? Course. Her arms. Jack, I never agreed to that. You know, this trip has been planned since we started college. We've scrimped and saved for it. Even fudged expenses to get extra cash from our parents. How could you expect me to give up something we've worked so hard for? Jack's temper flared. I know how your friends behave on trips like this. They mooch off others, and it's not always in ways I'd call respectable. I don't want you spending the entire summer with them, let alone to 147. Polly shot back, her eyes blazing. Don't you dare insult my friends. They're my closest friends, and I won't tolerate you talking about them like that. You've known about this trip since we started dating. How is it any different from the time you spend on your reserve duties? Jack's jaw tightened. The difference is that my trips are for work. Serious professional. I'm not partying or messing around. But if you go on this trip, we're done. Even if you don't plan to cheat. I know how things go. You'll drink too much, slip up, or let them talk you into something. Is this trip worth losing me? Are you trying to end this? Polly's tone softened as she responded. No, Jack. You're my guy now and always. I'll come back to you and we'll be together forever. Jack's expression hardened. If you go, you won't be my fiancé anymore. I won't tolerate it. Make your choice. The rest of the evening blurred for Jack. They sat through the movie as planned, but he barely paid attention. His thoughts were consumed by Polly, her trip, and past conversations that now seemed selfish and dismissive. Afterward, Jack skipped their usual routine of grabbing a snack. He drove Polly straight home, walked her to the door, and turned to leave. She reached for his arm. Jack, what's going on? You're not staying. We didn't even stop for food. Aren't you coming inside? I was looking forward to tonight. Jack shook his head. No, Polly. I'm not coming in. I'm not sure if I ever will. Again, you need to decide what you really want. But if you take that trip, You'll never see me in your house or your bed again. He turned and walked away, ignoring Polly's attempts to stop him. She trailed him, yelling, "Jack, you didn't even kiss me. Good night. Why are you acting like this?" As he reached his truck, she shouted, "Fine, Jack, be mad. All you want. I'm going on the trip and that's final. When I get back, we'll set a wedding date. Get over it." She slammed her front door as he drove away in. His old ranger inside. Polly's friends, Sophie and Mia, were waiting, grinning. Sophie smirked. "Didn't go over." "Well, did it?" Polly shrugged. "He'll get over it. He always does when I stand my ground. He knows. You can't do better than me," with a sly grin. She added, "But if I ever catch him cheating, he'll regret it." Shell raised an eyebrow. "That's a little hypocritical, don't you think?" "Shut up," Polly snapped. "I don't shit my man." Sophie burst out laughing. "Oh, come on, Owen. You were fine sharing Jared with me last week." "That was different," Lily said, dismissively. "Jack's my fiancé, not just some hookup. I don't care about anyone else now. Are we stopping first in Butter Bozeman? I feel like meeting a cowboy before we deal with more city guys." Jack didn't call or visit Polly after that night. The day after her trip began, he drove to her apartment to confirm she'd left. It was empty, to be certain. He drove 1 mile to her parents' house. The gas wasn't cheap, but he needed closure. While there, Jack returned Polly's belongings. Her father, visibly frustrated with her as well, helped him unload the boxes into her room. After a quick handshake, Jack returned to his now empty apartment. 2 years older than Lily, Jack had just earned an associate's degree in construction management and was working toward a bachelor's in project management. He aspired to start his own construction firm, someday as a staff sergeant in the National Guard. He balanced part-time jobs, reserve pay, and the GI Bill to stay debt-free. His life, though modest, was self-sufficient. When his parents died in a car accident, the construction business went under. The proceeds from selling their assets paid off debts, leaving Jack with nothing but an 80-acre plot of land with a shed and a stream. Occasionally, he'd camp there, either in the shed or by the water, finding solace in the simplicity of the place. After returning from Polly's childhood home, Pete made a firm decision. He was done with his apartment, packing his things. He moved to the piece of land he had inherited, setting up camp in the old shed, while attending reserve meetings and summer training. He initially spent his days fishing, swimming, drinking, and drowning in self-pity. But after a week of sulking, he snapped out of it and threw himself back into his exercise routine, determined to maintain his fitness for his responsibilities as a staff sergeant. 3 weeks of idleness left Pete restless. One afternoon, he wandered into the machine shed and eyed the equipment. The old tractor was still functional. He used it occasionally to clear brush, and the season was just early enough to squeeze in a late crop of soybeans. Although he'd need to hire someone to handle the harvest, the work would keep him occupied, and potentially earn him a little extra money with a plan for it. Pete hitched the plow to the tractor and started tilling the field. After a few rows, his neighbor, Mr. Thompson, stopped by to see what he was up to. Pete cut the engine and walked over to greet him. "What's the project?" Pete Thompson asked, leaning on his truck. "Thought I'd plant some soybeans," Pete replied. "I figured I've still got time to get a crop in." "You do with short-season beans," Thompson said with a nod. "But why bother plowing? Most folks use no-till these days. It saves time, cuts costs, and is better for the soil, less erosion, more moisture retention. If you're just planting a small field, you can borrow my no-till drill. Just don't wreck it." Pete scratched his head. "I've never tried no-till before." Thompson grinned. "It's simple, Mo. The grass spray with Roundup, and plant Roundup. Ready beans with the drill. Once the beans sprout, you spray again, and you're set. The same method works for corn or wheat. If you decide to rotate crops next year." Pete mulled it over that evening. No-till planting sounded efficient. Less fuel, less labor. The next morning, He got to work clearing the field with a bush hog over for days. He mowed, cleaned up debris and smoothed the soil with his disc ready to plant. He drove to Jeff's place to borrow the no-till drill. When Pete arrived, he found Thompson tinkering with a piece of equipment. Extending a hand, Pete said, "Morning, Mr. Thompson. Is the drill still available? I'd like to give no-till a shot and see how it compares to traditional plants." Pete's in. Thompson shook his hand firmly and chuckled. "Call me Immersive, Stan. You're a grown man now, and we're neighbors, friends. I hope I hear you're a sergeant in the reserves. Should I call you Sergeant?" Pete laughed. "Not a chance out here. Just call me Pete Deal," Stan said. "Let on. Hook up the drill and get you going. I'll stick around to make sure you know how to use it in 2 days." Pete had planted his soybeans after cleaning and returning the drill. He turned his attention to fertilizing. He collected soil samples and sent them to the county extension office for testing. Luckily, the field didn't need lime, and the fertilizer requirements were minimal. Pete purchased what he needed from the co-op and used their spreader to apply it, preparing the ground for his crop to grow. 2 weeks of hard work left Pete feeling accomplished sitting outside the cave. He now called home. He relaxed, listening to the soothing rush of the nearby stream and the distant hum of farm machinery. Yet as he enjoyed the peaceful evening, his thoughts drifted back to Polly. What was she doing on her trip? Were his suspicions about her justified? The uncertainty gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the doubts that had festered for months. Memories of Polly flirting and dancing with other men surfaced times when her actions seemed too casual, too familiar during deployments. Friends had mentioned seeing her out with other men looking and acting like she was on dates. One even sent him a blurry photo. Lily had denied everything, offering explanations that Pete reluctantly accepted though. The seeds of mistrust remained with a 6-pack of beer by his side. Pete confronted the truth. He didn't trust Polly anymore. In fact, he wasn't even sure. He loved her decision to prioritize the trip, and her dismissive attitude hurt, but not as deeply as he thought it should have. If his feelings were genuine, he doubted she truly loved or respected him. Based on her words and actions determined to move on, Pete resolved not to reach out when she returned. He wouldn't revisit their old hangouts or make himself available. Polly had only been to his farm once, and he doubted she'd find him. If she tried, if she did, she'd have to prove she was worth his time and effort. As the summer progressed, Pete kept busy when not attending reserve duties. He focused on his land. He converted part of the garage into a workshop for machinery, repairs, and planted a small garden for fresh produce. For now, he slept in the cool, comfortable cave, but knew he'd need something more suitable for winter while renting an apartment. If he returned to college was an option. The thought of leaving his land didn't appeal to him. He decided to find a way to stay through the colder months. The cave offered a scenic view, and Pete envisioned turning it into a winter retreat using old concrete blocks and stones. He planned to construct a sturdy wall across the entrance. He had already run electrical lines to the cave years ago, so utilities wouldn't be an issue measuring about 30x15 ft. The space was manageable, and leveling the floor with concrete would make it more comfortable with a clear plan in mind. Pete got to work, ready to embrace his new life at sunrise. Pete headed into town to gather supplies for his new project. He placed orders for sand, gravel and cement to mix concrete and mortar, along with steel door, triple pane windows, lumber and roofing materials for a porch. By noon, he was ready to dive into transforming the old bluff into a home. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. He chuckled at the thought of calling it a cave. It was really more of a rocky overhang than anything else. Pete's was straightforward, enclosed, the front and back with sturdy walls, leaving a steel to force storage access. The materials were delivered the following day, and he wasted no time getting started using a drill. He set rebar into the rock, leveled the uneven ground, and poured concrete for both the walls and the porch. Once the initial layers dried, He filled the porch base with gravel before adding the final concrete slab with the help of his trusty tractor. The work took just over a week. One afternoon, as Pete was smoothing the porch floor, he noticed someone cutting hay in a nearby field with surprising speed. When the tractor rolled to a stop near the stream, he was surprised to see a woman step down and splash into the water to cool off. Curious, Pete watched for a moment before returning to his work. Not long after, she approached him. "Hi there. I'm Grace Morgan," she said with a friendly smile. "What are you doing with the old bluff?" Pete returned her smile. "I'm turning it into my home. Just wrapping up the porch. No offense, but I need to keep at it before the concrete sets wrong." "Fair enough," Grace said with a grin. "I used to play here when I was a kid. Mind if I take a look around?" "Feel free," Pete replied. "I'll join you at the creek later, fully dressed this time, since you're here." Grace laughed. "Glad to hear it. Otherwise, I might have to put my army combat training to use." "Intrigued?" Pete asked. "Army, huh? What you do?" "Retired staff sergeant," she said. "I was a medic until I got injured on a mission. Now I'm helping out on my parents' farm. I'm thinking about getting certified as an EMT." Pete nodded, sharing his own story. "I'm a staff sergeant in the reserves. Done. To deployments. This land belonged to my grandpa and inherited it after my parents passed in a car accident. Their death saved everything else. I've been fixing it up, little by little. This place suits me, and I might just stay here for good." Grace tilted her head. "So it's just you and the land? No plans to settle down?" Pete chuckled. "I was engaged, but my fiancée preferred partying over commitment. She's out west now, having the time of her life. Sure, I'd like to meet someone, but I'm not in any rush. If it happens, it happens." The two continued chatting until Grace sighed, mentioning that chores were calling her back home before leaving. She asked mind if I swing by the creek once in a while to cool off. Pete grinned. "Not at all. Just make some noise when you come. I like to swim without much on." Grace laughed. "I might sneak up on you then. Could be fun to catch you off guard." With a playful smile, she added, "See you later, Pete." A couple of days later, Grace returned raking hay into neat windrows. When she finished, she parked by the creek, stripped down to a swimsuit, and waded into the water. Pete, working on the front wall of his bluff home, watched her now and then. When his task was done, he grabbed a pool noodle and joined her in the stream. "Mind if I join?" he asked. "Not at all," she replied, flashing a smile. They chatted briefly before Pete excused himself to return to his project, inviting Grace up for a beer. When she was done, this soon became their routine. Grace would finish her work, take a swim, and share a drink with Pete while catching up on his progress. Within a few weeks, Pete's new home had taken shape. He built it a level interior with a small kitchen, a cozy sitting area, a bathroom, and a wood stove for warmth. Remarkably, he managed to complete it for just $33,700 as hay season ended. Grace's visits became less frequent, but she still stopped by the creek twice a week. Pete found himself looking forward to her visits, disappointed when she didn't show one evening floating lazily in the stream. He gathered the courage to ask her out. Grace raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You're joking, right?" "Not at all," Pete replied, hiding his nose. "But if you're not interested, that's fine. Just thought it'd be nice seeing his sincerity." Grace softened. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just wasn't expecting that. You've always treated me like one of the guys. And well, I'm not exactly the same person I was before. I've got scars, a limp, and I haven't been on a date since I got hurt." Pete smiled warmly. "None of that matters to me. I like you for who you are. If anyone doesn't see how amazing you are, they don't deserve a chance." Grace, his face brightened at his words. She wasn't in love with Pete yet, but for the first time in years she felt like she could be. As winter approached, Pete and Grace continued spending time together. She loved how snug and welcoming his bluff home was, and every visit brought them closer. One spring afternoon, They sat on the porch, watching a thunderstorm roll in. As the winds picked up and the sky darkened, a deafening roar filled the air. The porch roof began to shake. Pete jumped to his feet, grabbing Grace's arm. "Tornado!" he shouted. "We've got to get inside," pulling her to safety. Pete led Grace to the back of the home into a small reinforced storage room. They shut the door and huddled together on the floor. The storm's roar grew louder. Glass shattered somewhere in the house. And then everything went eerily quiet. Pete waited 10 minutes before cautiously opening the storage room door. He motioned for Grace to follow him into the main living area. The storm's fury was evident. One of the front windows was shattered and part of the porch roof had been blown inside. Rain and debris littered the floor and his bed was damp, but not completely soaked outside. The porch roof was gone, torn away by the violent winds. Stepping into the drizzle, Pete surveyed the damage. His machine shed was reduced to rubble. Its roof collapsed onto the equipment. Inside around the property, once beautiful trees were split, twisted or completely uprooted. Grace came up beside him, slipping an arm around his waist and resting her head on his shoulder. "Oh, Pete, I'm so sorry," she murmured. "Let's check out the damage together." They headed toward what was left of the shed. As they rounded the bluff, near Pete's home, they spotted their trucks. Both had sustained damage from flying debris. Grace's windshield was cracked and starred, clearly struck by something heavy, while both vehicles seemed functional. Her truck was no longer roadworthy. With the broken windshield at the shed, the scene was chaotic. Pete's larger machinery was crumpled under the collapsed roof, and smaller tools and equipment were scattered across the yard. It was clear he'd need to clear the wreckage before assessing what could be salvaged. The storm hadn't been the strongest tornado, but it was enough to wreak havoc. The shed wasn't entirely gone of metal siding and roofing remained intact, but most of the structure had folded under the storm's pressure. Curious to see the storm's full impact, Pete and Grace climbed to the top of the bluff overlooking the area. Grace froze, her hand gripping Pete's arm. "Oh no, Pete," she gasped. "The storm hit our farm too. Look at the house and barns. They're a mess. I need to check on Mom and Dad." Without waiting, Grace took off toward her truck, moving as fast as her injured leg would allow. Pete hurried after, her catching her arm. "Hold on, Grace," he said firmly. "You can't drive with that windshield. Grab some tools and take my truck together." They rummaged through the debris in Pete's shed, gathering a chainsaw fuel, ropes, chains, assertions, a seal-long and steel pry bars with their gear loaded. Pete drove them toward Grace's farm, navigating roads blocked by fallen trees. Twice, they had to stop to cut through the debris, delaying their progress. What should have been a short drive stretched into 45 minutes when they arrived. Grace's fears were confirmed. The house in doubt. Buildings were in shambles, much like Pete's shed, mostly collapsed, rather than swept away. Grace ran frantically calling for her parents, her voice rising with panic. Pete followed, scanning the wreckage. Finally, they heard faint shouting from beneath what was left of the house. Pete reversed his truck, close to the sound, and they began clearing the debris. A large tree lay across one corner of the house, partially blocking a damaged cellar door. After cutting away the tree, Pete uncovered the cellar door, which was wedged against a staircase leading to the basement. Grace wasted no time rushing down, shouting for her parents. Pete followed with a flashlight and at the bottom of the stairs, Grace embraced her parents tightly. Pete stood nearby, offering silent support as the family reunited. When Grace's father, Mark, emerged from the basement, he stopped in shock, surveying the destruction. Grace and her mother flanked him, holding him close as they processed the scene. Pete joined them, his voice calm, but resolute. "Folks, it's getting dark and the rain's picking up again. Why don't you come back to my place for the night? We can regroup in the morning and figure out our next steps. My place isn't fancy, but it's dry, warm and secure. I'll patch the broken window and get a fire going. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. And that evening, the four of them found shelter at Pete's home. Grace and her mother prepared a simple meal on the wood stove. While everyone discussed how to move forward, Pete insisted they stay with him until they had a better plan. The next day, they divided tasks. Mark and Grace returned to their farm to salvage what they could, while Pete went to town to gather supplies. He purchased a replacement window and materials to rebuild his porch roof, filing an insurance claim for his losses. The adjuster promised to visit Pete's property and Grace's farm within a day or two. For now, Pete was allowed to replace the broken window to prevent further damage, but was advised to hold off on major repairs. Back home, Pete spent the morning installing the new window afterward. He cleared debris from the machine shed until he freed his tractor, which had minor damage to its sheet metal, but was otherwise operational. He was grateful. He'd taken out an insurance policy that covered his equipment, as well as his home and shed by evening. Grace and her father returned to Pete's place with essentials: a mattress, bedding, clothing, and preserved food. They'd also salvaged a generator to keep their deep freeze running. Pete brought out his own generator to power his appliances, and until electricity was restored, which according to news reports could take another day or two as they settled in for the night. Pete looked around at the makeshift household. Despite the chaos, he felt a sense of resilience and determination together. They would weather this storm and rebuild what had been lost. The following 10 days were a whirlwind for Pete. The insurance adjuster arrived promptly, and Pete was awarded $100,000 to rebuild his machine shed into smaller outbuildings. He also received $115,000 to compensate for the damage to his machinery, and $7,500 for repairs to his modest home. Since much of the settlement included labor costs, Pete knew he could save a significant portion by doing most of the work himself. Pete decided to expand his home. He planned to incorporate the existing 12x30 ft porch into the main structure and build a new wraparound porch on 3 sides of the house. Although the $7,500 for the home repairs wouldn't cover everything, Pete figured the additional costs would be minimal if he handled the work himself. His vision was to use the cave area as a bedroom, while dedicating the new addition to a living space, kitchen, and office. He also planned to construct a larger bathroom, accessible from both the bedroom and the addition. Eager to begin, Pete spent the days digging footings for the new porch, using salvaged materials from the storm-damaged buildings. He built the formwork and had the concrete poured before receiving his insurance payout. The funds arrived. Pete was ready to begin construction in earnest. He explained his plans to Grace and her family, who fully supported his vision. Pete decided to use concrete for the new walls, planning to veneer them with stone, though it required a larger investment. Up front, he believed it was worth it. Concrete would provide better insulation and protection from future storms by purchasing ready mixed concrete and handling the labor himself. Pete estimated he could complete the walls for around $2,500. With his military experience working with concrete, he felt confident in managing the project, despite needing to rent some equipment. Within days, the concrete walls were poured and curing. Pete was preparing to remove the forms and begin roofing. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. When his plans took an unexpected turn, his reserve unit called with orders. Pete was being deployed to Afghanistan for a year. While the additional income was welcome, he hated leaving the farm in its unfinished state. That evening, Pete broke the news to Grace and her parents. Grace's immediate response was a shock, "Oh crap," followed by a tight hug. Pete reassured them that they were welcome to stay in his home as long as needed, while rebuilding their new house, a steel structure on a concrete pad, was still in the early stages as they waited for the construction company to begin work. In the meantime, they kept busy with farm tasks and repairing their outbuildings. The night before Pete's departure, something unexpected happened. He woke to find Grace slipping into his bed before he could say a word. She kissed him passionately and pulled him close. Pete hesitated, whispering, "Grace, we can't do this. Your parents are right here. They'll hear us." Grace wasn't deterred. "I don't care," she murmured, her voice firm. "Mom knows we're together, and I'm sure Dad does too. I want this night with you before you leave. I'm not taking no for an answer." Ignoring Pete's protests, she straddled him, her determination overriding his reservations. Despite their attempts to stay quiet, Grace's pleasure was loud enough that her parents likely heard afterward. They fell asleep, entwined, waking only when Anna began preparing breakfast. When Pete groggy emerged from the bedroom, Anna greeted him with a knowing grin. She set 3 cups of coffee on the small table and chuckled at Pete's sheepish expression. Sensing his discomfort, she said kindly, "Pete, I was wondering when you two would finally share a bed. It's clear how much you care for each other, Mark, and I have no issue with it. Grace is a grown woman, and if she chooses to spend her nights with a man, we deeply respect. It's her decision." Pete managed a grateful smile, feeling both relieved and slightly embarrassed. Anna's understanding made the situation easier, and as he sat down with his coffee, he silently resolved to make the most of his time. Before leaving the day, Pete had to report for deployment. Finally arrived. Grace and her parents stood together, watching as he drove off to join his unit. As before, Grace planned to retrieve his truck after his departure and return it to his farm. Pete had added her name to his checking account so she could handle his bills while he was overseas, and she and her father agreed to tend to his small acreage during his year-long absence. The first 3 days at the reserve center were consumed by the usual grind of mobilization. Mountains of paperwork, equipment, inspections, and last-minute shipments. Larger machinery they'd need was already stationed in the operational theater, with smaller tools sent ahead. Prior to departure, to Pete's surprise, Grace and her parents showed up at the bus station to see him off as boarded. Pete turned back to wave, catching Grace's teased smile. After arriving at the mobilization station, Pete and his unit underwent medical and dental evaluations, personnel updates, legal briefings, and intensive training, including weapons qualification. During a legal session, Pete quietly updated his will, leading everything he owned to Grace. He chose not to tell her about the decision. After 3 weeks of preparation, Pete's combat engineer unit boarded the aircraft bound for Kazakhstan. There, they spent a short acclimatization period before heading to their deployment site, where they replaced another engineer unit. Over the next month, the handover was completed, and Pete's team assumed full responsibility for engineering operations in the area, supporting Allied and US forces. The local summer was in full swing, when Pete's units arrived with temperatures often soaring past 130 F. The dry, dusty environment was grueling, but the work never slowed. Days bled into nights, as the unit cleared routes, constructed schools and roads, and fortified bases. They faced shot fire, verbal maltreatment from hostile locals, and relentless workloads. Pete, both loved and loathed the intensity. Despite the chaos, Pete often called home to talk to Grace. Their conversations grew increasingly personal, and the word love began to surface. Pete found himself thinking about her more and more, questioning whether feelings were romantic, platonic, or simply physical. Whatever the answer, his connection with Grace felt deeper and more genuine than anything he'd experienced with Polly. 3 quarters into the deployment, disaster struck while working on a mountain road. Pete's unit came under attack by insurgents. The firefight raged for nearly half an hour before the platoon sergeant was wounded. As the next senior NCO, Pete quickly stepped into the leadership role, organizing the platoon and assessing their situation. When the platoon leader was also hit, Pete found himself fully in charge, leading the remaining soldiers through the firefight. Spotting a lull in enemy fire along one sector, Pete initiated a counterattack, rallying 13 soldiers. He led a charge to break through the insurgent line as they advanced. Requested air support arrived with attack helicopters, raining fire on enemy positions. Within minutes, The insurgents were retreat. Reinforcements arrived shortly after helping secure the area, evacuate the wounded and mop up. Pete's leadership during the attack earned him respect and recognition. He remained in the role of platoon sergeant for the remainder of the deployment, proving himself both capable and charismatic under pressure. By the time the unit returned to the US, Pete had been promoted to E7 and awarded the Bronze Star for his actions. The long-awaited day of return finally arrived. Pete's unit was replaced, and they flew home to a hero's welcome. As the plane landed, families and friends gathered to greet the soldiers. Pete barely had time to skim the crowd before Grace launched herself at him, wrapping her arms and legs around him in an enthusiastic embrace. "Pete, I missed you so much," she exclaimed, kissing him. "I'm so glad you're back. I've got your truck. What do you want to do first? It's almost lunchtime." Pete laughed, squeezing her tightly. "I want good food. We may do, but I've been dreaming of real pizza and steak. Let's start at the House of Pizza. I love that place in college. After that, I just want to go home, sleep for a day and eat some more at the restaurant." They took Pete's favorite table. Holding hands, they chatted until a waitress approached. Pete froze when he recognized her Polly, visibly pregnant. She gasped upon seeing him. "Pete, oh my God, it's you," she blurted, dropping her notepad. "Where have you been? I've missed you so much." She leaned in arms wide for a hug, but Pete instinctively stepped back. His voice was calm. It was calm, but cold. "Hi, Polly. I see you've moved on. Or is that from partying with those friends of yours?" Polly's face crumpled and she fled into the kitchen, leaving Pete and Grace stunned. A different waitress appeared shortly after her attitude. "Kurt." Pete hesitated, uneasy about the situation. Turning to Grace, he said, "Maybe we should go. I've lost my appetite after that." Grace nodded without argument. Rising, she leaned in to kiss him softly. "I'll meet you outside in a minute. I need to use the restroom first." The waitress threw a cold glare at Grace before stomping back into the kitchen. Pete waited by the door, but loud voices soon erupted from the hallway, leading to the restrooms. Alarmed, he stepped closer and saw Grace and Polly, face to face, both visibly upset before Pete could intervene. He heard Polly's venomous sneer. "I don't know what you think you're doing with my fiancé. You pathetic little. I know his unit was deployed, but now that he's back, he's mine. So step aside, sweetheart." Grace laughed coldly. "Your fiancé, honey, Pete wouldn't take you back if you were the last woman on earth. You threw away your chance when you ditched him to run off with your trashy friends. You really thought he'd forgive you?" After that, her eyes dropped to Polly's pregnant belly. "What's this? Trying to trap him into playing daddy for your kid? Or is this just one of your souvenirs from your adventures? Face it, you're done here. Now get back to the kitchen and earn your paycheck, or better yet, you'll find another sucker to fool Pete's mind." Grace's voice turned steely, and just so we're clear, I'm a retired Army sergeant. I've dealt with worse than you. Don't make me regret being polite. Without another glance, Grace turned and walked toward Pete. Her cheeks slightly flushed, but her demeanor calm. Sliding her arm through his, she smiled up at him. "Sorry about that, Pete. I hope I didn't overstep." But she had it coming. "Let him get out of here. I've lost my appetite. Can we go home now?" On the drive back, Grace grew uncharacteristically fidgety, glancing out the window and bouncing slightly in her seat to Pete. She seemed equal parts excited and anxious. Just before they reached his property, he finally asked, "What's going on? You've been acting weird since we left town." Grace hesitated. "Okay, don't be mad, but while you were gone, I might have spent more of your money than you expected. Dad and Mom thought it was a good idea, and well, I kind of went all in. I hope you're not upset." Pete frowned, unsure of what she meant. As he pulled into the driveway, he stopped the truck abruptly. His house stood before him, fully finished. The roof was complete, A wraparound porch hugged three sides of the home, and the exterior was beautifully veneered with stone flower beds and shrubs adorned the newly landscaped yard. His machine shed had been rebuilt, slightly larger than before, and everything looked peachy, and he sat in stunned silence, staring at the transformation. His stomach twisted as he considered the cost. "Grace," he said. Finally, his voice tightened. "It looks like you spent all of my insurance money, and maybe even some of my army pay. You knew I planned to do the work myself to save on labor. I didn't want to blow through everything before he could continue." Grace interrupted Pete. "No, I didn't spend all your money. We did exactly what you said you wanted for the house and shed, but we didn't pay for any labor. My parents, and I did all the work ourselves with help from neighbors and friends. Everyone pitched in to support our local hero. Please just come see for yourself before you get upset." She grabbed his hand and lifted him out of the truck, practically pulling him toward the house. At the front door, she gestured for him to enter. "This happened when I was in the first or second year at junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside, built on the old porch's foundation." Crossing to his desk, she handed him a bank book and turned on the computer. Once it booted up, she opened his financial software and showed him a detailed breakdown of every expense. Pete's jaw dropped as he scrolled through the numbers. His accounts were still in excellent shape. Grace had only spent about half of what he'd estimated for the materials alone. "How did you manage this?" he asked, incredulous. "You spent less than I thought possible for all of this." Grace beamed. "Well, I made a few deals when we explained you were deployed in Afghanistan and rebuilding after the tornado. A lot of suppliers gave us steep discounts. Some even donated materials. We told them the labor was being done by volunteers to honor your service. They really went above and beyond. For you." Taking his hand, she added, "Come on. I want to show you the machine shed in shot. You'll love it. And after that, we're heading to Mom and Dad's for supper. They've been waiting to see you." Pete followed Grace as she guided him through the yard and machine shed, still trying to process everything. He was seeing the space was exactly as he'd envisioned in his plans. Perhaps even better. Compressed air lines had been installed at key points throughout the shed, and a maintenance pit had been built into the floor, complete with a sturdy cover for safety when not in use. As they stepped outside, Grace pointed out where the tornado-damaged trees had been cleared, replaced by a new shed, tucked behind the house, to store firewood safely out of the weather. Pete's disbelief deepened as she explained the work that in the restoring and improving the property. Back inside the house, Grace led Pete to the bedroom, carved from the old cave. She closed the door, softly, behind them, her expression shifting as she stepped closer. Wrapping her arms around his neck, she pulled him into a kiss that started tenderly, but quickly grew more fervent. Her hands roamed as she pressed herself against him, her soft moan igniting something deep within it. Pete responded in kind, their clothes discarded in a trail leading to the bed. The passion between them was raw and consuming. As they came together, Pete lost himself in the moment, the weight of his emotions finally releasing. When it was over, he kissed Grace, gently before pulling her close, her head resting against his shoulder, and her leg draped over him. "I missed you more than I can say," Grace whispered. "I love you, Pete. I worried about you every single day you were gone." Pete tilted his head to kiss her forehead. "I love you too, Grace. After everything I felt with you, I realized I never truly loved Polly. I didn't even understand what love was until you. Whether we're working, sitting together, or making love, it's all better with you. Everything is better because of you." After a brief nap, Pete carefully slipped out of bed, so as not to wake Grace. He wandered to the kitchen and grabbed a cold dough size from the fridge. Stepping onto the porch, he sank into one of the new chairs and stared out across the stream, taking in the familiar sights and sounds of home. The low calls of cattle mingled with the distant bark of a dog, and the faint hum of a neighbor's tractor. The gentle trickle of the stream beside the house completed the serene backdrop. Pete was so relaxed that he didn't notice Grace had joined him until she stepped onto the porch. She was as bare as he was, her eyes glowing and a soft smile lighting up her face. Pete couldn't look away from her. Stunning. Pete murmured, his voice full of quiet reverence. I love you so much. Grace's eyes filled with tears. No, I'm not, she said softly. I have so many scars now, but I love you for saying that. Pete reached out and pulled her close. You're beautiful, Grace. Every scar is a mark of your strength and dedication. They don't detract from you. They add to your perfect to me. I wouldn't change a thing. Now sit here with me for a bit. I just want to enjoy this piece until I finish my beer. Then we'll head over to your parents' place on the drive to Grace. A Stanley farm. Pete took in the surrounding area, reconnecting with the land he'd missed. The tornado's aftermath was still visible down. Trees lay in tangled piles, some rotting while others had been trimmed back to encourage new growth. The destruction hurt to see, a painful reminder of nature's raw hour arriving at the Morgan property. Pete noticed the progress they had made though. Signs of the storm lingered. The barns and house had been rebuilt and the remaining trees showed signs of recovery. Still, Pete felt a pang of sadness at the sight of the new house. A simple metal structure with a small porch. So different from the charming two-story home the tornado had destroyed. Mark greeted Pete with a firm handshake and a grin while Anna pulled him into a warm hug. Welcome home, Sergeant, Mark said, his tone light. We all glad you're back. Safe. Maybe now these women of mine can stop worrying so much and actually get a decent night's sleep after a hearty meal. The four of them sat outside as the evening settled in, chatting and laughing under the stars. As the clock neared 900 p.m., Pete found himself struggling to keep his eyes open. He finally stood, stretching with a yawn. It's been wonderful catching up, but I'm beat, he admitted. I need about a week of sleep to recover. Thank you for the amazing dinner and for making me feel so welcome. Pete stood to shake Mark's hand. A firm grip exchanged between the two men. Anna stepped in for another warm hug, holding him tightly before pulling back with glistening eyes. Don't be a stranger, Pete. I pushed her, she said, her voice soft, but sincere to Pete's surprise. She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek before stepping away with a smile. Pete returned the smile and began walking to his truck. Her parents, who seconded goodbye and hurried after him, slipping her arm around his and leaning her head on his shoulder. When they reached the truck, Pete opened the door for her, only to be surprised when she climbed in. Without hesitation, he blinked, puzzled. Grace, what are you doing? Her expression was a mix of nerves and determination. Pete, I'm coming with you, she said. If you don't want me to, I'll understand, but I want to be with you. I told Mom and Dad already. This is what I want. Pete paused, gathering his thoughts carefully. Grace, you know I love you. I'd love nothing more than to take you home with me tonight. Are you sure this is what you want? We need to think this through. About what people might say. How your parents or the neighbors will react. I want you with me. But I also want to make sure this feels right for you. Grace's face softened as she smiled. Pete, this feels right. I've known I loved you completely since before you left. I wanted to talk about this sooner, but I never found the time today. I told Lily that you're my man. And I meant it. I don't just want to spend the night with you. I want to spend my life with you. Make me feel whole. Like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. I know I'm not perfect, but I'll try to be everything you want. Pete studied her for a long moment before climbing into the truck as he started the engine. He glanced back toward the house. Mark and Dana stood together. Watching, Mark's arm was wrapped protectively around Anna's shoulder, and they waved as Pete looked their way. Anna leaned into Mark, resting her head on his chest as they stood, silhouetted against the porch light. Pete nodded and turned onto the road. Grace, scooting closer to rest her head on his shoulder and placing her hand lightly on his thigh. When they arrived at Pete's home, they walked, arm in arm, to the front door. Grace flipped on the light as Pete headed to the couch where his duffel bag still sat from earlier, digging through its contents. He tossed items onto the floor until he found what he was looking for. His right combat boot. turning it upside down. He shook it until a small box fell into his hand. Holding the box tightly, he walked over to Grace, whose expression was a mix of curiosity and surprise. Pete opened the box, revealing a ring. Grace gasped, her eyes widening. Grace, Pete began. I've told you before that I love you. I was planning to do this soon. But since you're here with me, now it feels like the right time. If we're going to share this home, I think it's only fitting to make it official. Grace, will you marry me?
Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she nodded.
Trembling slightly as she extended her left hand, Pete slid the ring onto her finger with care. And once he let go, she threw her arms around him. Her voice, barely a whisper. Yes, Pete Johnson. I'll marry you. I've wanted this for so long from the moment we met. You treated me like an equal. Like I mattered. Scars. At all. You've never made me feel like just a woman to pass the time with, but a true partner. I love you for who you are, and how you see me. She pulled back slightly to meet his eyes. Now, she said, with a teasing smile, let's clean up and get some rest. We have to go to Dad's tomorrow to show off this ring and grab more of my things. Pete blinked. More of your things. Grace blushed. I hope you don't mind, but I've already moved a lot of my clothes here. While you were gone, this place started feeling like home to me. I've been staying here a lot while looking after it. And honestly, it feels more like ours than just yours. Pete laughed, shaking his head. Well, I guess that settles it. The two headed for the shower, where they enjoyed a quick but intimate rinse before stumbling toward the bed. Their passion reignited, and they made love with an intensity that left them both breathless as they drifted off to sleep. Grace curled against Pete, her arm and leg draped over him protectively. Pete fell asleep with a contented smile, feeling more at home than ever before. As the first light of dawn filtered into the room, Pete and Grace stirred, still tangled together from the night before. Careful not to wake her, Pete slipped out of bed to use the bathroom. When he returned, the bed was empty. He wandered into the kitchen where he found Grace, brewing coffee, her hair loose, and her expression serene. She looked up with a warm smile. Why don't you sit out on the porch and enjoy the morning? While I finish this, I'll bring you a cup in a minute. Pete nodded, stepping outside into the crisp morning air. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden rays through the mist. Drifting over the stream, the gentle sounds of nature surrounded him. Birds singing, livestock stirring in the melodic babble of water. Pete exhaled deeply, feeling at peace for the first time in what felt like ages. Grace soon joined him, carrying two steaming mugs. She handed him one and sat down just as comfortably unclothed as he was pulling her chair closer to the edge of the porch. She gave him a playful look. So she teased, tilting her head. You see anything you like, soldier? Pete smirked. Definitely. The view of the stream and your dad's hayfield is something I've really missed. Grace gasped in mock outrage before breaking into a grin. You idiot. Maybe I should go inside and put some clothes on. See how you like that? Pete chuckled, giving her a mock, serious look. Oh, no need for that now that you mention it. There are some other things worth admiring. But you know, teasing. A man who's been stuck in Afghanistan without a woman for that long might be risky. He could backfire. Grace leaned back, laughing. I sure hope so. How about we finish this coffee? Let things backfire and then grab some breakfast before heading to my parents' deal. Pete grinned, clinking his mug against hers deal. After their playful reintroduction, the two took a brief nap before Grace got up to make what Pete proudly dubbed the proper breakfast. The spread included biscuits, ham, eggs, hash browns, and freshly brewed coffee. Once they'd eaten, they dressed and headed to her parents' house, arriving just as Mark and Nana were sitting down for lunch. Anna jumped up to set to extra places, but Grace waved her off. Mama, don't bother. We just finished breakfast a little while ago. We're not hungry. Anna raised an eyebrow, her tone teasing. Grace, Morgan, why on earth were you doing that? Pete had to wait until lunchtime for breakfast. I thought I taught you better than that. Mark snorted with laughter, earning a sharp glance from her. Realization dawned a moment later, and her cheeks flushed a deep red. She turned back to her meal, muttering. The room fell quiet for a moment before Emma busied herself with her plate, avoiding Grace's amused grin. Grace poured 2 glasses of iced tea, handing one to Pete with a quick kiss. Then sitting beside her mother, she casually extended her left hand across the table, and his eyes widened as she noticed the engagement ring, letting out an excited squeal as she grabbed Grace's hand to her closely. After lunch, Grace stayed to help her mother clear the table and wash the dishes, while Pete and Mark sat outside chatting. When they finally left, the truck was loaded with a collection of Grace's belongings, which they took back to Pete's house. In the months that followed, Pete and Grace seamlessly blended their lives. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. The 80-acre farm Pete had inherited and helped out on Grace's parents' property. Over the years, they assumed full responsibility for both farms, growing their family in the process. After the birth of their second child, the families decided to trade homes. Mark and Lila moved into Pete's cozy cave home, while Pete and Grace took over the larger main house. Mark and Lila remained there until their passing. Pete retired from the Army Reserve after an impressive 40 years of service, achieving the rank of Command Sergeant Major. The youngest son eventually took over managing the combined arms, allowing Pete and Grace to spend their later years back in the cave home, where their life together had begun. It was a peaceful retreat, filled with memories of love and resilience throughout his life. Pete remained steadfast in keeping 3 promises he had vowed never to return to Lily after she left him, a promise he upheld without question. He had pledged to love, honor, and cherish Grace, a commitment he fulfilled every single day of their marriage. That he had promised Mark he would take care of Grace, a promise that defined his life's greatest purpose and joy. As the golden hues of the setting sun painted the sky, Pete and Grace sat quietly on the porch of their cave home. Their hands intertwined. The stream below murmured a familiar melody, a song that had accompanied their journey from the very beginning. The land around them, once a canvas of hard labor and sacrifice, now thrived as a testament to the love and resilience that had defined their lives together. Pete leaned back in his chair, his gaze sweeping across the farm. That had become their legacy. I never imagined it would turn out like this, he murmured, his voice touched with a grace. Her silver hair glowing in the evening light, smiled warmly. Neither did I, she replied. But every twist, every challenge, every moment brought us here, and I wouldn't change a single thing. The sound of laughter carried on the breeze from the main house. Their grandchildren were playing near the stream, likely learning to skip stones, as Grace had once taught their children. Pete could see William, the youngest, standing nearby, his presence, a reminder of the continuity of life. The farm was now in his capable hands, thriving under his stewardship, as he blended tradition with innovation. Do you remember when we first started here? Pete asked, his eyes distant with memory. I thought this cave would barely hold us through one winter. Grace chuckled softly. And I told you it would last a lifetime. Like us, she said, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. It wasn't easy, but we made it home, and we made it ours. The cave home, now more a retreat than a necessity, remained a cherished place. Its walls held stories of late-night conversations, shared meals, and quiet moments of reflection. It was where their life had truly begun, a place that had witnessed their triumphs and struggles, their laughter and tears. Pete looked at Grace, his expression tender. You've always been my anchor, he said quietly. No matter what life threw at us, you kept us steady. Grace met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with emotion. And you've been my compass. Pete, you've always shown me where home is, where it's always been. As twilight deepened, Pete thought of the promises he had made. He had vowed never to return to Lily after she left him, a promise he upheld without regret. He had pledged to love, honor, and cherish Grace, a commitment he had lived every day, and he had promised her father to care for Grace, her promise that had shaped his life's greatest purpose and joy. The years had weathered them both, but the bond had only grown stronger. Their family, their land, and their love were enduring legacies that would carry on long after they were gone. Pete glanced toward the main house, where the lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the yard. It was a symbol of the life they had built, vibrant and full of promise. Grace rested her head on his shoulder, and together they watched the first stars appear in the sky. The laughter of their grandchildren and the gentle hum of the stream filled the air, a comforting reminder of the cycles of life. "We've had a good life," Pete said, after a long pause. "Better than I ever dreamed." Grace nodded, her voice soft but steady. "And it's not over yet. There's still so much more to enjoy, more to give, more to share." Pete smiled, kissing her hand, gently. "As long as I have you, Grace, every day is a blessing." And so, they remained on the porch as night fell, the land around them alive with the memories of a life well lived together. They faced the future with the quiet confidence of two souls who had weathered every storm and come out stronger, knowing their love would continue to shine as a beacon for generations to come. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.